Returning to Arkham Asylum was such a nostalgia trip, and I'm happy to confirm that it holds up really well. It's insane to think that a comic book superhero game that wasn't about Spider-Man came out in 2009 and was this good. The one thing everybody always talks about with Asylum, above all else, is how it's absolutely dripping with atmosphere. It's certainly what I remembered the most, and I can say that after replaying it, that still holds true. Arkham Asylum is honestly bone-chilling at times. You really feel like you're locked in with a bunch of monstrous psychopaths, cut off from the rest of society with only your tools, skills, and wit to carry you through. The foreboding tone is set in literal seconds after booting up the game, and it doesn't let up throughout the entire journey. Combine that with some seriously fantastic environmental storytelling, and Arkham Asylum is easily one of my favorite settings in any video game. It is phenomenal. As far as the story itself, while I wouldn't call it phenomenal by any stretch, it's still pretty good. It really feels like the writers of this game knew how to adapt each and every featured character. Not only that, but the pacing of the story is excellent, with every event feeling logically interconnected and the player never once feeling like they don't have a goal to accomplish that needs to be accomplished, be it for the main story or even the side content like Riddler challenges. Oh yeah, Riddler challenges. They certainly exist. I've always been torn on these because on one hand, I think Asylum's adaptation of the Riddler was perfect in concept, however in execution I do have some issues. Most of the Riddler challenges just boil down to either scanning a very obvious environmental detail, or just having the right piece of equipment unlocked. Some of the environmental riddles were pretty cool admittedly, but to call the rest of these things puzzles would be rather generous, given that you literally just need a certain piece of gear to accomplish the task. So yeah, it's a cool adaptation in concept, but mechanically it's pretty lacking. His voice performance is superbly entertaining though. When it comes to the overall combat though, I think Arkham Asylum holds up really well. There's definitely some jank, primarily when it comes to trying to get a read on counter range, and I'm frankly not a big fan of Titan enemies because of how inorganic they feel compared to standard enemies, but at its best, Arkham Asylum is a fun and engaging beat-em-up, and the combat challenges are tons of fun to go for high scores on. Also, the fact that the Joker is playable for a handful of challenge maps is just, it's the best. As for the game's stealth, it has enough depth to allow for an enjoyable degree of player expression, but the gargoyles do feel like a major crutch mechanic given how easily they can be used to clear an entire room of enemies. I don't remember much about how future titles expanded upon the Predator stealth system, but I do remember the Mr. Freeze boss in Arkham City being top tier, so hey, here's hoping that Arkham City fleshes out this system a bit more. But yeah, Arkham Asylum is still fantastic. I will definitely be going back for the Platinum Trophy once I've cleared my backlog, and honestly, I can't wait to come back and play it some more. It's a solid 8 out of 10. Now on to Arkham City. Arkham City is easily one of the best sequels ever made, at least for the last 300 years. From gameplay to character work, everything is just amped up to 11 in Arkham City, and it's just a thrill to play from the word go. The combat's more polished, the Predator stealth does much more to encourage creative player expression, exploration is vastly greater in scope, side activities have been upgraded into full-blown side quests, bosses are absolutely insane, there's even more enemy variety, more gadgets, there's even more characters to play as, both of whom are very fun to play by the way. Though I will admit, Catwoman felt far more unique than Robin, who was pretty much just a Batman clone if we're being perfectly honest. But even still, a clone of a really good character is still a really good character. Just ask Fire Emblem Smash players. And the story is just epic. Like, unironically, it is epic. From the fantastic inclusion of the League of Shadows to the depth of Mr. Freeze to the build-up to Joker's death, everything just ties together so well that by the end, I'd have to be on something wacky to suggest that this isn't one of the best Batman stories ever. I will admit that Hugo Strange, while superbly voice acted, is kind of underwhelming. He just radiates neckbeard energy, and you barely even get anything to do with him for the middle 80% of the game, so I mean the intro does a great job at setting him up as the primary antagonist, but aside from that, we barely get any interaction with him until we go to defeat him, which itself is a pretty simple task. He just lacked the presence and gravitas of characters like Mr. Freeze, the Joker, and, if I'm being honest, even Penguin. But aside from Strange, the rest of the story is an all-time Batman classic, easily up there with stories like The Dark Knight Returns, Long Halloween, The Dark Knight, and Year One. And can we talk about Mr. Freeze and Ra's al Ghul? Because, oh my god, these bosses were amazing. Where Ra's apostrophe S possessive noun. Where Ra's boss fight felt like more of the ultimate test of player skill when it came to combat, Mr. Freeze was the ultimate test of skill in regards to stealth. Both fights really do bring out all the strengths of each respective mode of play, and they look damn good while doing it too. When Ra's walks out of the Lazarus pit and he gives the camera that smirk, boy, the man just knows he's got the riz. And Mr. Freeze, oh my god. I thought Batman was supposed to be the Predator in these encounters, but apparently Arnie here didn't get the memo and decided that he was gonna roleplay as the Hunter instead. I feel like I could gush about these two bosses in particular all day long. They're just so excellent. I also really enjoyed the inclusion of Catwoman, even though her conflict with Poison Ivy was, if I'm being honest, pretty laughably stupid. It is treated as a joke, which is fine, but it was kind of weird going from, oh dang, Poison Ivy captured us, to, oh, she's mad at Catwoman for not watering her flowers. Okay. But aside from that, I think they did a good job with her, and I enjoyed her secret ending where she leaves Batman and Gotham is just utterly doomed. Only for the game to literally rewind and say, alright, but seriously, go save Batman. Gameplay-wise, I really enjoyed her too. She doesn't have any crazy gadgets, but she has a handful of unique tools and is extremely agile, with her primary skill for traversal and stealth being her ability to climb, which honestly made for some really interesting gameplay scenarios, not the least of which was her final showdown with Two-Face. This fight felt like a really cool adaptation of the boss formula established by Mr. Freeze, where it was kind of a stealth thing, but you also had to be on the lookout for Two-Face because, in a way, he was also a predator. Harley Quinn's Revenge was also a pretty fun DLC, though it did feel as if the game was running on fumes at that point. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for playing as my boy Robin, and it was cool seeing Harley finally get some time in the spotlight, but I also can't deny that Robin just felt like an echo fighter for Batman, and the Harley Quinn boss fight, if you can even call it that, was really just another Mr. Freeze style encounter, but nowhere near as technically or mechanically interesting as it or even the Two-Face fight. I appreciated it in the Catwoman content because it felt as if it was being naturally adapted to suit Catwoman's kit, but Harley Quinn's boss fight is quite literally just the Mr. Freeze fight, just with a different character who already plays like the character that isn't Catwoman. It wasn't bad, not by any stretch, but it definitely felt lackluster. But even with all of its issues, Batman Arkham City is utterly fantastic, and even though I think I still personally enjoy Asylum more, I feel like I would have to be full of crap to even suggest that Arkham City isn't a colossal step up from Asylum. And overall, just an outstanding sequel. 9 out of 10, I will definitely be going back for the Arkham City Platinum Trophy. Now on to Arkham Knight. In many ways, Arkham Knight is a major improvement, no, a colossal improvement over its predecessors, but I can also see why it's nobody's favorite Arkham game. I think a lot of what makes Arkham Knight work is great, but the game has a bad tendency of not knowing when to say that enough is enough. The fact that the main story goes on for like another 3 hours after defeating the titular villain so that Scarecrow can kidnap Gordon and throw a small nation of tanks at Gotham PD just felt really dumb, especially since the fight with said small nation of tanks is extremely frustrating to suffer through. I'm gonna be real with y'all, this was easily the lowest point in the game, and probably the lowest point in this series of games, and it didn't even need to happen. That's the worst part of it. It's like some rando coming up and kicking you in the balls, but then finding out you're not being featured on an episode of some prank thing that you would get paid a lot of money for. I understand that the story needed to have Scarecrow kidnap Gordon so that he could get to Batman, but why not just have Scarecrow kidnap them both following the Arkham Knight boss so as to spare me 2 more hours of my life and keep the pace of the narrative consistent and thrilling? I will say, the Batmobile was an awesome mechanic, minus those circular tunnels which are a pain in the ass to try and actually make work, and I was far more impressed with it than I originally thought I would be, but I can honestly say the game would be better without the Cloudburst fight with the Arkham Knight, because that was awful. How do you make a boss fight in the Batmobile, so mind-numbingly boring that I actually, literally, physically dozed off? Another issue I neglected to mention with City was the fact that these games seem to selectively inject certain Batman comics into the Arkham canon, and while I appreciate seeing these works adapted and referenced into the games as a Batman fan, it does feel like a lazy writing practice. With Arkham City, they just kind of expected players to know about the League of Shadows, and thus understand the weight of their inclusion in the story as a baseline, which in fairness wasn't unreasonable at the time because Batman Begins had come out not too long before this game, and it heavily featured the League of Shadows. However, most casual audience members who haven't seen Batman Begins or read that many Batman comics are likely to see them and think, well, alright, I guess they're a thing. However, when it comes to Arkham City, it didn't feel like nearly as big of a misstep compared to how Arkham Knight chooses to incorporate a certain comic book storyline that you probably immediately know what I'm talking about. Let's rip this band-aid off. The Arkham Knight is Jason Todd. Oh no, who didn't see that coming from a mile and a half away? So yeah, Arkham Knight is basically Under the Red Hood, but adapted to suit the Arkham timeline. This doesn't work for 2 reasons. One, as a Batman fan, the foreshadowing to the Knight being Jason Todd was about as subtle as a plane flying into the Gotham Trade Center. Reason number 2. For anyone less familiar with Batman, they'd probably have a similar reaction to this as they did the League of Shadows being in Arkham City, except even they would have already figured out the twist. He even puts on the Red Hood helmet. Wow, OMG, ah! The worst part is that after all that buildup and the big showdown with the ultimate rival to Batman, Jason just disappears until the end of the game where he snipes one of the cuffs that Scarecrow has on Batman, and then he just kinda bugs off to who knows where. This wouldn't have been so bad if it wasn't for the fact that, again, the game just goes on for way too long after the fight with Jason. There is such a massive gap where Jason just disappears from the story, arguably when he should have been the most relevant to it, and it feels really bizarre to say the least. If I'm being honest, boss fights were also a major letdown in this game, at least compared to Arkham City. Don't get me wrong, the fight with Jason was pretty good, but nothing in Arkham Knight really ever came close to the hype of Ra's al Ghul, or the sheer tensity of Mr. Freeze. I wouldn't say that any of it was bad, barring the Cloudburst battle, which, again, let me reiterate, please, was awful, but nothing really blew me away either. Even the fight with Jason was far from extraordinary. Once you figured him out, it was honestly kind of a cakewalk. I should probably make it a point to clarify that I basically did 0 side quests because I have like 100 more games on this backlog and I do intend to come back to Arkham Knight eventually. So hey, maybe there are some complete bangers of side quests that I'll get to cover in the future, but even then I'd argue that it was just smarter for Arkham City to include its best bosses in the main story. I did however play the DLC campaigns and they certainly exist. The Batgirl DLC was easily the best by far, with its own unique location to explore even after you've beaten the story, which, hey, don't get me wrong, it's far from the level of Gotham, Arkham City, or even Arkham Asylum for that matter, but it's cool that the player has the option of coming back to it so that they can gather collectibles and all that. I also appreciate the fact that each of the characters are playable in the AR challenges, and they even threw in Azrael too, just because why not? He's cool. Aside from that, all the DLCs were just way too short, which is ironic given how bloated the base game's main quest felt. I completed all the Batgirl DLC just shy of half an hour, and to say that it felt devoid of really anything interesting would be putting it pretty mildly. The Catwoman DLC was decent, I guess, and Nightwing is a really endearing character to play as. Seriously, I love this guy so much. Every time he appears in any media, he is the man. He is the man. But would I have preferred to be able to just play as all of these characters in Gotham with a handful of side missions and exclusive Riddler challenges like Catwoman did in Arkham City? Yeah, pretty much. I get why they couldn't do that with Barbara, obviously. But why limit these characters like this? I'd honestly love to be able to explore Gotham as Harley or Grayson, but sadly that's just not an option. Also, I get that Batman is the title hero, but why couldn't we get more skins for the other characters? I'm just saying. It's probably starting to sound like I hated this game, but honestly, those glaring issues aside, I had a blast playing Arkham Knight. Combat is as much of an improvement over Arkham City, as City was over Asylum. Maybe even more so thanks to the inclusion of the Batmobile. The Batmobile just adds so much to exploration, and the enhanced movement and traversal options go a long way in ensuring that the player doesn't feel too naked when outside of the Batmobile. When it comes to combat, the game is honestly as smooth as butter, and it feels so rewarding to nail those perfect sequences, like, seriously, just, chef's kiss, it's so good. And aside from that overly drawn-out epilogue and the laughably obvious twist that the knight was Jason Todd, I thought the story of the game was pretty excellent. I was on the edge of my seat when I thought that Barbara was dead. I was moved to see Poison Ivy give her life to save Gotham. I sympathized with Gordon's turmoil regarding the villains and Batman. I appreciated that Batman was shown to be flawed and willing to manipulate his loved ones if he felt it lending to doing the right thing, and the hypocrisy in that versus his complete refusal to kill even if it meant saving more lives. I appreciated seeing the Joker genuinely scared for the first time since the Punisher threatened his life all the way back in, what was it, the 90s? The character work in this game is excellent at times. So yeah, as many problems as Arkham Knight has, and as serious as some of them may be, I still enjoy the crap out of it, and I'll definitely be coming back for the Platinum at some point, even if I honestly dread replaying certain sections of it. I'd give it a 7 out of 10 overall. It's nowhere near as good as Arkham City, or even Asylum for that matter, but even then, that's hardly an insult because Arkham Knight is still really good. The Middle-earth games are kinda like The Force Unleashed, but for Lord of the Rings. They play fast and loose with the lore, to put it lightly, but man, they are just so fun to play, and I still enjoy the crap out of them regardless of their issues. Middle-earth gameplay is very reminiscent of the Batman Arkham games, at least when it comes to the roots and foundation. Square to attack, triangle to counter, circle to stun, cross to dodge, L1 for eagle vision. The difficulty feels approachable, but still pleasantly challenging. Even the enemy types are very similar to those found in Batman Arkham. Heck, there's even a fear system, environmental takedowns, wonky camera moments. They really brought over everything. Thankfully though, Middle-earth does a lot to build on and adapt those core elements into a style very befitting of an M-rated Lord of the Rings game. The Nemesis system. My God, this system was such a brilliant idea. At its core, the Nemesis system is one of the best implementations of dynamic storytelling that I think I've ever seen in a video game. Death in Mordor is a bit finicky. The player character Talion can't die permanently, and most orcs can be revived via necromancy. Killing an orc means that they may very well come back at some point, and dying to one means that they get promoted and will be even tougher next time you encounter them. Which you almost certainly will, because now they will see you as their prey to hunt down. You can also recruit orcs into your own army, either building an offense to lay siege to an enemy fort, or establishing your ranks so as to bolster the defensive power of a fort that you already hold ownership over. But it doesn't stop at just how you interact with them. Many of them have unique interactions amongst one another. Some orcs share blood and will actively seek revenge if you kill one of their brothers. Some orcs will seek to betray one another. Some will defend each other by ambushing you when you attempt to kill a member of their army. These orc captains don't just stand out contextually, there are also a number of mechanics that make fighting them even more interesting than the average orc encounter. Not only do orcs have straight up immunities which can be used to turn the tables on the player, but many of them have their own personal fears which can be exploited to mentally break them, thus making them easier to either kill or recruit. There are honestly so many variables that go into every orc captain encounter that even the most ritualistic of players who stick simply to the tactics that they find most reliable will be hard-pressed not to find themselves being forced to adapt regularly to maintain the upper hand, and it makes these fights so much more memorable as a result. Hell, even shaming orcs, a seemingly simple technique for bringing down the level of a powerful captain, can lead to some wildly unique interactions. I once shamed an orc across so many encounters that he went from one of the most brutally powerful foes to a sniveling oaf incapable of speech and yet wanting nothing more for me to finally kill him. He has no speech, but he must beg. Other orcs will even bully them and potentially kill them if they feel like it. If I'm being perfectly honest, the Nemesis system alone carries this game to an 8 out of 10 minimum. But I think the devs over at Monolith might have taken that for granted because as fun as this system can be to play within and explore the limits of, it becomes such a prominent aspect of the game that it utterly obliterates any sense of pacing that the story might have once had. Shadow of War is divided up into 3 acts, 4 counting the epilogue. However, the bulk of the game by and large will be spent in Act 2, and in the epilogue. Act 1 is an effective introduction to what Shadow of War has to offer, and it can take anywhere between 5 to 10 hours to get through. It's a solid opening act, and it lays the groundwork for the story and gameplay with a very brisk pacing that ensures the player will always feel as if they're doing something, while also having plenty of story beats to keep them engaged with the narrative. Then Act 2 happens, and all of that is thrown completely out the window. The goal for the player in Act 2 is to build their orc army in order to bring the war to Sauron and Barad-dûr. This means traveling to a map, killing and recruiting orc captains so you can lay siege to that map's fort, and doing so again and again until every fort is yours and you can finally take on the Dark Lord himself. The process for recruiting captains to build up for a siege alone can take up multiple hours, so add to that the fact that most of the plot threads set up in Act 1 are regulated to optional side content which you could easily miss if you let it slip your mind. And yeah, Act 2 all but completely butchers player engagement with the overarching narrative, which feels bizarre in a game all about preparing for a massive war with perhaps the greatest villain in all of fiction. Also, maybe this was just me. Yeah, this dude took me 21 minutes to beat. Look, I enjoy Shadow of War's combat as much as the next guy. Heck, I really enjoy Shadow of War's combat, probably more than the next guy. But there is absolutely no excuse for a boss with multiple immunities, utterly massive damage output, an arena which spews fire, a second boss with his own immunities to back him up, and a pool of infinitely respawning enemies, most of which are very large enemies with their own immunities, to also have the ability to heal all of their health on demand in a matter of seconds with basically no drawbacks, and Death Defiance, which is basically an extra life. Again, this fight took me 21 minutes and basically forced me into utilizing a very boring, very repetitive strategy because if I did literally anything else, I would be immediately punished by having my health reduced to a very small amount or outright one-shot by either the boss or his backup boss. Basically, I had to spam arrow strikes,
teleports, which immediately bring me to the enemy for a grab-style attack, which has iframes that keep me safe,
while camping the arrow refill spots. When I wasn't spamming my arrow strikes, I was just rolling around like a coked-up Shadow the Hedgehog, because attacking any of the enemies would leave me super vulnerable to the other literal army of giants and orcs cluttering my screen. This was so far beyond the realm of forgivable stupidity that it breached the potential of giving me a damn stroke. Oh, and did I mention that Act 3 is literally just the final mission? Don't get me wrong, the mission itself is nearly an hour long, many times longer than every other mission in the game by far. But Act 2 was many times longer than Acts 1 and 3 combined. And on top of that, The epilogue is basically one giant grind for a 3-minute secret ending, quote unquote, that caps off the story exactly as the first 3 acts implied that it would. So, there's no twist, there's no big plot resolution, it's just anticlimactic and pointless. Like, why, game? And seriously, the fact that so many of the plot threads established in Act 1 are regulated to very easily missable side missions is a crying shame, because some of these side quests are downright outstanding, or at the very least a joy to play through for the fan service alone. Don't get me wrong, some of these were downright boring and repetitive, and the characters were hardly worth getting attached to given how immune to suffering they became, at least after the first act. But that Kernan questline, oh baby, that questline was bloody terrific. Fighting a Balrog only for his psychotic necromancer looking to kill both you and Sauron with his army of the undead to show up and try resurrecting the Balrog, only to resurrect himself with an army of orcs that you had once slain, was genuinely superb. It told a complete story with fan service and interesting twists that incorporated multiple elements from the main story, and not to mention all the mechanics, into a single cohesive quest that felt damn good to complete. Seriously, Zog is goated. Look, Shadow of War is downright insane at times, and chock full of Lord of the Rings fan service. From fighting the Nazgul, a Balrog, and Sauron himself to direct visual callbacks to some of the most iconic moments of the films and lore. Look, I am by no means a Tolkien lore fanatic, I should probably make that clear. Besides the Middle-earth games, I've read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings back in, like, middle school, and I've seen the Lord of the Rings movies only recently, having watched them for the first time in 2020. Yes, I know, I was missing out something fierce. So I'm not going to be able to pretend that I know all of the lore inconsistencies in Shadow of War, but I can say that I'm aware that there's a few glaring inconsistencies there. But that's also kind of the fun of it. Despite how blatantly it wants to be canon, it totally works as a spin-off tale with its own branching canon that lets the player indulge in a wild power fantasy unlike any other. And like The Force Unleashed with Star Wars, that's really all it ever needed to be when it comes down to it. Shadow of War has its issues. It has major issues, okay? Don't get me wrong. But it's so fun to play that I'm eager to come back and get that platinum trophy. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I was gonna give it an 8, but yeah, some of the issues were pretty terrible. But overall, I really liked it, and I can't wait to come back to it once the backlog is over with. One last thing.
Shelob.
I was not about to gloss over this one. The decision to make the horrific Spider Queen which tormented our dearest lad Frodo in Return of the King, and turn her into an 11 out of 10 goth dommy mommy with an outfit that specifically emphasizes the appeal of her legs, has to be one of the strangest and most downright utterly bizarre creative decisions that I have ever seen in any piece of media. And to be honest, I fuck with it. Wrap me up in that web cocoon and do as you please, Mommy Shelob. No, but seriously, the whole time she was projecting her human form, I couldn't help but think about the episode of Love, Death, and Robots, Beyond the Aquila Rift, where the main character's smoking hot love interest turns out to be a freaky alien spider monster. Ugh, I don't know what to say, man. That Spy Dussy really got us all acting strange, don't it?